Hello, welcome to a series of 2 lessons on the Lord's Prayer in Greek, from the Greek New Testament. As far as possible, I'm making these 2 lessons suitable for those who know Greek and also for those who know perhaps not much or very little. Of course, the benefit is greater if you do know Greek, and I've made 40 or so numbered Greek lessons that you can follow through, one of many courses that are available. The advantage of mine is that I avoid unnecessary technical grammatical terms, and I've trimmed away extras. I only introduce things when we make use of them. So, for example, instead of memorizing and reciting the alphabet, we just learn letters as they come up. And every example is taken from Scripture. None are made up, which means we get into great Scripture from Lesson 1. But anyway, so today we're on to the Lord's Prayer. And I advise people to learn the Lord's Prayer by heart in the original Greek. In doing so, not only do you store the best prayer in your heart, but also you store up a lot of vocabulary and grammar of the Greek New Testament, and which it's much better to learn it this way than to learn it off a dead vocabulary list or learning a meaningless chart or table of grammatical forms. And if you can't learn it by heart, pin it up on the wall so that you can see it, for example, in the smallest room of the house where you sit with nothing else to do, or on your smartphone or whatever. Okay, so just by way of introduction to the Lord's Prayer, the Italian writer Giovanni Papini says that the love of a father is the best kind of love. In the love of a father there is no trace of a brother's perfunctory sense of duty, no trace of a friend's self-interest and rivalry, of a lover's lustful desire, of a servant's pretense of faithfulness. Giovanni Papini wrote those words, former atheist, but became a Christian. He wrote those words in 1923. Another interesting point in this prayer, Jesus never uses the singular pronoun, I, me or my, but 9 times he uses the plural, we, us, our. The Christian faith is something to be held and practiced in community rather than individually. In the lead up to the prayer, the verses just before the prayer, Jesus tells his disciples not to pray to impress others and not to babble on. Many ancient records show how people then used all kinds of magic formulas that they would repeat over and over. Interestingly, Hebrew words were popular even with pagans because they recognized that there was a certain spiritual power in them. And last of my introductory comments, I say that the prayer should not be regarded as something to be said word for word, but it's a model or a template for prayer. A couple of church fathers called it an outline, but quite early on Christians did start to repeat it by rote out of a somewhat misplaced, perhaps, reverence for the exact words the Master had said. It begins with hutos, like this. We'll look at the text in just a minute. But in the Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles, an early Christian document dating from about 100 AD, this becomes huto, which seems to mean these words, and then it says you have to do this 3 times a day. So it restricts free prayer in public to those who have a prophetic gift. It's interesting to see how the New Testament was not prescriptive like that. The New Testament doesn't set out in detail what you have to do. Pray this prayer 3 times a day, for example. But the New Testament allows leeway for your own situation and circumstances, and also for your own initiative. So, okay, now let's get into the Greek text and see. So here it is, Matthew chapter 6, verse 9. Hutos un proseucheste humes, pater hemon, haen tois uranois. Paternoster is an alternative name for this prayer, taken from the first 2 words of its Latin translation, Father, our. Okay, so hutos is like this, one word meaning like this. so, and I put so with a capital letter because in our English translation we'd put that as the first word. This word in Greek comes second, but in English we'd put first. So, like this, pray you. Oop. So this este ending means you, and this part also means you. So it's repeated in a way, and this part, this ending alone would be sufficient to indicate that it's you plural, but the addition of the freestanding pronoun you puts a little bit of emphasis, and actually in this case makes a contrast, contrasting to the people Jesus just mentioned who babbled on in their prayers. Luke's version of this prayer in Luke chapter 11, Luke just says Father, not our Father. Pater would have been Abba in Aramaic, the language Jesus probably taught his disciples in. And Abba corresponds exactly to Dad, the normal everyday word people use to address their father while they were children and still as grown-ups. Notice that it says in the heavens, heavens plural. The Hebrew word for heaven, shamayim, is always plural. It's actually dual, meaning two, but it's always shamayim, and so this is probably why the Greek word used to correspond to it is also in the plural. The Didache, which I referred to just before, written about 100 AD, has the Lord's Prayer almost identical to Matthew, but it uses the singular here. And note also that we have en urano singular in the next verse, which doesn't seem to be intended to mean anything different. Well, this could be taken to mean our Father who's in heaven as distinct from our earthly fathers, or our Father who's in heaven. In other words, our Father, you live in heaven. The original manuscripts had no punctuation, but in English anyway, the pause indicated by the comma makes a subtle difference in meaning. I could say my sister who's in Australia, and I'm distinguishing her from my other two sisters who live in New Zealand. But if I say my sister, comma, who's in Australia, I'm simply telling you something about my sister, not trying to distinguish her from anyone else. Anyway, all the versions that I checked, except the King James Version, just say our Father in heaven, which is the option 1 above, just saying, distinguishing God from our earthly fathers. Okay, so my suggested translation then would be, so then, this is how you should pray. This is how you should pray. When we say it in English like that, we can reproduce a little bit of the emphasis here by putting the emphasis on the word. So then, this is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven. Okay, so now let's look at the next little section. Here's the last bit of verse 9. Hagios theto to onoma su. Sanctified may it be the name your. So this ending here, we translate it in English as may it be, or we could say sometimes it's written let it be. It's actually called a third person imperative, so it's really expressing a wish or a desire. We could almost say I want it to be kept holy. And the grammatical form is a passive. Characteristic of a passive is this Greek letter called theta. So may it be. Passive is often indicated in English by be. May it be. May it be done. So we're not saying who we want to do it, but we're just saying I want it to be done, or it was done by somebody. That's passive. But it's clearly God that we want to do it. The Jews tended not to mention God's name if they could avoid it. So, and this is addressed to God, reverently addressed to God. So, saying, God, it's like saying, God, please sanctify your name. Notice in Greek we say the as well as your. Of course, in English we leave out the if we have your there. So we just say, let your name be sanctified or kept holy, hallowed, says the old King James Version, a word that we don't use today. So we would say made holy or kept holy. Eltheto, again, this third person imperative, may it, in this case, may it come, the kingdom your, and again we have the and your working together. Kingdom, in this case not meaning an area of land, but actually talking about God's rule. That's what we want to come, God's rule. We want it to come on earth. And we notice the poetic form of the prayer here. We have the three verbs which are laid out in parallel with similar verb form, verb ending. Hagiastheto, eltheto, and genetheto, that which we will come to next. May it be kept holy, your name, may it come, your kingdom. And in the next part of verse 10 we'll see, may it happen, may it be done, your will. Genetheto to thelema su hos in urano kai epiges. Happen, may it happen. This verb is passive in form, as you see the theta here, but it's active in meaning, grammatically called deponent. May it happen, the will your. As an English speaker, I have to be careful pronouncing this word because it's a tendency in English to put a strong stress on the second to last syllable, thelema. But these little indicators here, which were originally put in to indicate tone in classical Greek, the tone was lost by the time you got to Koine Greek, which was the Greek spoken throughout the whole of the then civilized world. No longer had tones, but these little marks were kept, and they used more, roughly as a guide we can say they're used to indicate stress. So we should try and say this word thelema, fairly a bit more even than stress than I say it in English, but if anything putting a little bit of stress there and not on that one. Okay, the will your, hos in urano kai epiges, as in heaven, and notice here we have heaven singular. Obviously no difference in meaning intended from what we had in the previous verse. Kai epiges. This is a genitive form. The epi takes the genitive, and the s indicates it's a genitive. The root form of it is just gay. And in takes what's called the dative case, and that's characterized by this ending here. The root form of heaven is Uranos, from which we get Uranus, the planet. Uranus that was discovered in modern times and given the name Uranus. So The other interesting point to note here is that kai I've translated as also. First approximation, kai means and, but it frequently, if you see two kais together, kai can mean both and but frequently it also means also, as in heaven, also upon the earth. Okay, so just a final comment about this, the interesting question: to what extent is this prayer eschatological? That means dealing with the end times. Quite a few commentators see it like that. Not only this part, verse 10, this is the second and third part of verse 10, but also the rest. For example, asking for bread, is that really asking for the heavenly manna for the great tomorrow? This is discussed in the ICC commentary by Davies and Ellison, which I'll refer to again later. But for the meantime, that concludes part 1 of our 2-part video series on the Lord's Prayer.